Hello everybody, welcome to another week of Game Wisdom Live for March 25th, 2018. Rob is still out finishing up his work at the moment, so it's going to be me for one more week, and then hopefully we'll have a co-host back up there. But it has been a very interesting week around here nonetheless. So first off, I finally got confirmation regarding the other library system. I think I may have mentioned that last Sunday, but we're going to be talking about me coming out in June or July regarding hey Gator, how you doing? But we're going to be getting back in touch around June or July in order to finalize me coming out there for the fall season, and then hopefully if things go well that will push things forward. Now, one other bit of exciting news, I was contacted by a publisher who handles technical books and books regarding game design and programming, and they were asking me if I wanted to write a book on video games. And as you know, I've already been working on a rough draft for one. So they are interested, and I need to send over some more information this week. It's still too early to tell, but the idea has certainly grown. Hey, Alberto. It's going from being a simple, $5 to $10 ebook to something that's going to be about 20 to 25,000 words. Right now I'm about at 16,000, so I need to figure out how to grow things out beyond just saying, I like this game very, 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 very much. But while it certainly is exciting to hear from a publisher, I'm not getting my hopes up just yet. I don't want to get things too excited until I send over the proposal over this week. I'm still waiting to hear from a few more people about that. Some people I know who've either published ebooks or who've just done publishing in general, just to hear what they say, what questions to ask, just so I'm not losing my head over writing this book. Now, as you may or may not know, the Discord channel for Game Wisdom has officially gone open to the public as of last Tuesday. For those of you watching this live right now, you should see a description or you should be seeing the invite to the Discord channel down in the description below. That will get you basic access, so that's just for chatting with us, if you want to hear about our industry topics, what's going on with Game Wisdom, stuff like that. And of course, higher tiers are tied to the Patreon. The grab back voting, VIP access to these videos, stuff along those lines. So if you've been wanting to get into our Discord channel, definitely check that out. Also, it's been happening this week. We finished Dark Souls 2, and now we moved on to Alice Madness Returns, and to try to get that done in about 4 or 5 streams. We're still in the kind of doldrums of winter time for major game releases, although I heard Sea of Thieves came out, but it hasn't been doing all that well. I'm trying to think if there's anything else going on Game Wisdom wise. Oh, if you missed it, I put up a triple game spotlight using the Jump platform, which it seemed like got some good interest. It was kind of a way of looking at games so I wouldn't be able to dedicate full 30 minutes to an hour long video on, so I think I'm going to try and do another one this week. And my contact at Jump said that they're going to try and get me some more developers to talk to on the podcast. Now, of course, for those of you who don't know, GDC was this past week, which meant that everyone in the game industry was focused on the conference. So I have about 3 or 4 more podcasts currently being scheduled right now that everyone's getting back from it. And hopefully we'll be able to get some things going this week. Also, it's coming up very soon. In 2 weeks, I'm going to be giving my first presentation regarding Ready Player One and virtual reality. So this is one I've been developing over the past month. I finished the PowerPoint, now it's just up to me to run through it a few times to make sure I can get everything steady and so I know what I'm talking about when I'm presenting it. As a bit of a fun treat, banging my leg against my desk there. Yeah, I think I may do that, Alberto. But as a fun treat, I'm going to have a very special critical thought this week, where a few of the kids who have been listening to my radio show that I've been putting on, they're going to be coming over, and we may have them here for a recording where I'm sure either I'm going to talk to them about game design or they're going to interview me. We're still not sure how that's going to work yet, but that should be a lot of fun. I also started coming up with the idea for the game design Q&A with a few questions that were posed. I recorded half of it to only realize I had the microphone off the entire time, so I'm going to have to record that once again. But as a bit of a good news, I did finish the Dissecting Design early this week, so that's all ready for tomorrow. And for those of you who've been watching the live streams, you should have a good guess as to what that game's going to be. We'll see, one of the kids is a huge Amiibo fan, so we may be talking Amiibos and Nintendo. But I think that does it just about for the Game Wisdom related news. So let's talk about some industry things that's been going on. And the big thing that came out of GDC this past week has been discussing unionizing in the game industry. As we've said before, unions in the game industry have had that very shaky discussion over the last 20 years. When news broke about EA Spouse and other very annoying or very bad working conditions for game developers, especially the huge turnover rate, people have been wanting to talk more about unions for a long time. But the organization, of course, the IGDA, has kind of quelled that. But this past year, with more discussions regarding bad working conditions, with the loot box defense one. I'm not sure what you mean. Oh, the loop. Oh, I think you mean the presentation there. I actually haven't heard anything about, at least on Gamasutra or on Twitter. Seems like everybody has moved on to talking about unions. But with all the issues that's been happening, with developers being closed, and of course everyone moving to the independent space, there's definitely more talks about trying to provide more protection for game developers. Yep. And that's true, Getter. EA Spouse happened, I think, like early thousands. And you would think that would have been a major cause for alarm. But it's always been that case of the major companies basically looking out for themselves first. And it actually gives me a very interesting discussion. For those of you who missed it on Twitter, I was discussing one of the questions someone posed about how would you teach an introduction to game design class. And the problem, though, is that game design is such a blanket term. And it's very hard to really distill what does it mean to be a game designer. And there's that certain, je ne sais quoi that goes into making game design, because it is both an art and a craft. You can teach someone the programming side or the aesthetic side and test them on it. But how do you teach someone on what makes effective control schemes? Or how do you design your UI so that it can be easy to understand? There's just a lot of soft skills that go into game design that make the people who learn them, highly prized among companies. Again, there's a reason why we still talk about people like Sid Meier, Will Wright, Shigeru Miyamoto, Hideo Kojima, and so on. They've, built their careers on that, like that magic or that art of game design. And it's not something you can just, take into a classroom, 6 to 12 weeks later, you have 20 students who can make games just like Shigeru Miyamoto or Yoko Taro. And it's very hard to keep these people going. Yep. But even from a tabletop standpoint, while that is certainly a good starting point, especially considering how pen and paper distills down game design without the need of programming, it's still hard to really test someone on, do you understand why Mario's a great game? Do you know why people play World of Warcraft for over 10 years? But one thing that has been infamous in the game industry has been the huge turnover rate, or turnover being, someone leaving a company. And that has been a famous part of the game industry at this point. As a very interesting coincidence, it was reported, let me get his name, where was it? Here it is. Dean Evans, who was the creative director behind Far Cry 3 Blood Dragon. That was the crazy spin-off that came in the Far Cry universe. he's left the company after working at Ubisoft for 12 years. And one of his quotes was, "I've never really taken much of a break." And while the press announcement makes that seem amicable, it's very hard to know what happened behind closed doors. And that's a very big point. Sure, they still have the Far Cry license, and they of course have the idea to make Blood Dragon, but how much was that game developed by him personally, in terms of the idea, the actual gameplay of it? And we've seen this, where studios will either adopt or be given a new franchise, or I'm sorry, pre-existing one, and how much of their new DNA is going to impact that game. For instance, we saw what happened when Tobunobu, I'm pretty sure I just butchered that, Ikigai, left Team Ninja, and then the team made a Ninja Gaiden game after him. Sure, they have the same basic idea, but how much do you really put stock, or how much do you put credit in the creative direction that the lead director or creative designer, whatever that title was, brought to that title? As Getter just mentioned in chat, Hideo Kojima being a really good point. I mean, the Metal Gear franchise has become synonymous with his name, and you wouldn't have that series without his input. And we saw what happened when Konami decided to do Metal Gear Survive. It just lacks that soul. And another really good point would be the creator of Katamari Damacy. Let me grab his name. Keta Takahashi, who, after the first game, he didn't really want to do too many more of them, but Bandai Namco decided to do, I think, 3 or 4 more games in that franchise. And again, while the nuts and bolts were there, you didn't have the exact same spark. But the problem, though, is from a consumer standpoint, most consumers outside, again, of the mega developers, Shigeru Miyamoto, Hideo Kojima, they don't really associate developers to the games. Oh. One second, let me just turn off Discord there so you don't hear those beeps again. And that is certainly true. Like, the one, like, strange example of this would be Sid Meier Civilization, who at this point, for those of you who don't know, each game is basically ran by a different creative director. John Schaefer, Soren Johnson. I don't know who did Civ 6, sadly, off the top of my head. And what they do is they use as a way to kind of give each new Civ game its own unique spin. So it's not just them repeating the same game design for years on end. And then Sid Meier now takes more of an advisory role at Firaxis when he's working on these games. And that is certainly a great thing. But he's still at the company. It's not like Firaxis, tossed Sid out, on the street and still using his name. But as Getter said, it's very interesting about, again, with the music industry, with what the publishers do to force bands and stuff to keep making songs, keep making CDs or albums to try and get as much money as possible. And as I wanted to go back to a point Getter said earlier, brain drain is real, and that is certainly a big point. In any creative industry, there's a lot of mental work that goes into making these games. Yes, you may be sitting at a computer for 68 hours a day, but you are certainly straining yourself when it comes to trying to create something original. I mean, I've had some of those struggles when I'm trying to come up with new posts to write or videos to do, but that is still a drop in the bucket compared to someone literally trying to build a game from scratch. And when you throw in or you compound a major studio, publishers demanding check-ins and progress, and the fact that you are spending millions of dollars on these games, it can be very stressful. And all this can pile up on a designer. And again, it's why it's become a routine that after a major game is done, that people leave that company. And why many of them go the independent route, where they lose a lot of that stress. I need to take a sip. And getting back to the point, it's just very hard. Or I think a lot of companies, even a lot of consumers, really don't give the value to what it takes to make these games. Even what's considered quote unquote, crappy games, or you know, games that don't feel completely finished, still took a lot of work to get to that point. Mm-hmm. Yep, exactly. And that's another really good point there, Getter, that it has been famously known that the game industry doesn't pay anywhere near other parts of the tech sector when it comes to similar jobs. A game programmer is treated with less money and less respect than just a programmer at a major firm or a technical company. And of course, we have heard this many times over that you need to, appreciate that you're working in the game industry. Let that passion be enough. We don't want to pay you more for it. And of course, the other big point, we don't need you to help make our game. We can just hire anyone out of college. And again, a lot of people treat game developers as just commodities. You can put anyone in the creative director role, and they'll just make the next XCOM, or they'll make the next Nier Automata. And Nier Automata being another great point. The games that have really stood out, Nier, Undertale, Stardew Valley, even Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, they had a very creative group of people working on those games. When I talked about Breath of the Wild, I said that is some master level game design. To be so confident in your core gameplay loop that you basically turn off all direction and tell the player just explore, and it worked. That was not coming from, a first year game design graduate right out of college. Mm-hmm. And I'm just curious, and I haven't heard this too much, what is the turnover rate in Nintendo? Because, I hear from a lot of other studios, I've heard Valve can be a very nasty place to work with. There's been exposés and hearsay about what it means to work there, but I haven't heard anything from Nintendo. Like, we still hear that the higher-ups in Nintendo still work there. And I don't want to try and pronounce their names because I'm pretty sure I'm going to butcher them on live stream. But Shigeru Miyamoto is still working there. Like, it kind of seems like Nintendo is one of those companies that if you get hired there, you're kind of there for life almost. And again, I don't know if that's good or bad, but it's still very important to combat turnover. You shouldn't have to work 80 hours on video games to get it done. Yeah. And that's another big point. That's another very famous idea of Nintendo, and easily another segue. Yeah. Nintendo is great when it comes to their own, not so much when you're dealing with second or third parties. Mm-hmm. Yep. And as we've said before, video games are both programming and entertainment, and not a lot of people get that combination. As I was talking about on Twitter and in my presentation, you can have someone who is technically proficient. They can make the best damn game engines. They understand how to code a game from scratch. But if they don't understand the entertainment side, you're going to end up with a title that is technically adequate, but is completely soulless. But just as on the other hand, you can have someone who gets game design. They know how to build these amazing ideas in their head, but if they can't program or know how to handle PR, they'll have a game that is passionate, but no one's going to play it. And again, I think there's a lot of misinformation about what it means to make game industry. Yep. Don't forget, I guess art can also include sound. But there's a lot that goes into making games and keeping these studios running that the mainstream game journalism doesn't really talk about, and that most people who are trying to learn about games don't really know. Yeah. Exactly. I've played many independent games that's just literally me clicking buttons on screen and not knowing what they do, and I'm like, okay, this is a game, but do I really want to keep playing it? And I just lost my train of thought for a second. So I'm wearing my nose because my allergies are bothering me because we're entering spring. Yep, exactly, Alberto. Like, Besiege is an amazing tech demo, but there's not much there as a full-on game. Not the example I was thinking of, but I remember when I talked with Yacht Club Games, two of their founders, about what it means to make these games. And he mentioned that they have a friend who's just building a game all by himself, that he's not getting any outside input, and he's surprised when people are having complaints and remarks about his design. You really just can't design these games in a vacuum. Now, I think that is true to an extent, Indy, but as I've said before, I don't believe that just making video games is the road to success. There's a lot more soft skills involved in being successful. And I just remembered my example. When I spoke with Cliff Harris and Jake Burgett, they've been doing this now for over a decade. Same goes for Jeff Vogue. And the point is, there is a huge difference between just being able to make a video game and being able to survive or subsist off of them. And just being able to say that you make games doesn't mean you can make games for a living. I mean, Jake has certainly had trouble with trying to position Shadowhand. Yep. And there's just a lot of soft skills involved with being successful at making games. And we've said this before, but we've seen developers who had their one-hit wonder and then just disappear. Or they can't make a successful follow-up. I mean, Notch being a really good example of this. After the success of Minecraft, he's kind of disappeared onto the annals of Twitter to complain about video games and women, I think we've seen. Yep. Yeah, the echo chamber effect is certainly real. Again, this is a major part of any creative industry. You know, cooking, art, even like high professional stuff like medicine. That you become your own best critic. You know, how dare you doubt me? You know, I created this from hand. You know, it's all handmade, and how dare you question me otherwise? And I'm sure there are developers out there who are just like that. Yep, exactly. Notch got paid off to not make games anymore. But that's, again, that major point that you can have that one big success, but what do you do after that? And having people completely burn out on game development, not wanting to make anything anymore, you know, that's not how you keep an industry going. What happens? Yeah. Yep. And not only that, but there's also job security. What happens if you put all your passion in one game, but the studio doesn't do a good job marketing it, or they release it at the wrong time and the studio gets closed regardless? Or we've seen with studios hiring a lot of people temporary to help finish a game, and then they're like, okay, go, see you later. It's one of those cases where you need the experience to get a good job, but all the good jobs are usually held by seniority for a lot of these major studios. So what you do is you basically start your own company. Yep, that is certainly true, Indy, and another major point. A consumer doesn't care that you spent the last 6 months working 60 hours just to finish a game. They don't care that you spent 5 years as an independent developer to get this game out. They just care about what you did or what this game is on Steam or itch.io or so on. Yeah. They can certainly repeat to some extent, but it's just a lot of people see it as, you know, trying to commoditize it. But as we've said, the creative side of the game industry and that craft really goes ignored by major publishers and by by the consumers. Again, there's that notion that if you just throw enough money at a game, it will be a Game of the Year winner. But some games just aren't designed to be these 5 to 10 million copies sold. We talked about this with Resident Evil 7. It is a great game, but there is no way in hell that was going to be a Call of Duty or PUBG competitor. And as we've said, and PUBG being a good example, how many Battle Royale inspired games are we going to see in the last, well, we're going on about 8 months left of 2018. It's going to be so many of those games, and the same thing that happened with the MMOs, and the same thing that happens with loot boxes. That once people see a success, they think, well, I can do the same thing. When I talked with, I think it was Tim Rustweg about this, when he said that after he played Doom, he thought, I could make the next best Doom game, or it could have been another developer. It doesn't work like that. And it's just very hard to try and keep these studios alive. Exactly. But here's the big question, Indy. How do you put value on that from a company standpoint? I mean, you see this, like when people, I mean, I'll give you a good example. There's still no standard definition for what skills are required to be a creative director or a game designer in the game industry. Every studio has their own thing. Usually the most common requirement is, 5 to 10 years working on a video game or working in the game industry. But again, how do you put value on what it means to design these games and design them in a way that makes them engaging? Again, you can say, oh, the programming side. But what about someone who is a master programmer but only does it in ASCII? Or someone who only does it in assembly? Yep, money doesn't make happiness, but sure it helps, exactly. And that's the other point. These video games, they do cost a lot of money. And at the end of the day, though, how do you convince someone that your idea is worth it? It's just very hard, especially when you can. How do you say my game is great, but you're trying to stack it next to Call of Duty or Overwatch or Nintendo or any of Nintendo's games? It just is very hard to put a price tag. And the price is another big point, as we've said before, with the idea of the race to the bottom or race to the dollar. And yeah, that's true as well, Gordo. Part of the skill is being dealt by the democratization of the tools. We mentioned this last week when I spoke with that programmer who I'm afraid, I think his name Evan Todd. There we go. I almost forgot his name. But the point is, it's gotten a lot easier to make games these days. Unity, Unreal, Game Maker, and so on has demystified a lot of the engine side of making these games. I mean, I am sure I could go on Steam right now and see a lot of very, low quality new releases. I had no idea Ni no Kuni 2 was already out. Let's see if there's anything weird here. We have a game called Hide or Die, Tiny Bubbles, Alice must find the key to escape hidden objects. That doesn't sound so much like a game title, but a YouTube video description. Let's see. But the point is, while I am looking at the Steam's updated list here, it's gotten a lot easier to make a video game from a technical side. But again, getting or understanding the design or the craft side, that's not something you can just throw money at. Arguably, may not be something you could teach all that well. It really depends on the person. And of course, being able to understand how to prototype a game, how to iterate. Hell, we've said this many times over, how to take constructive criticism is a major point. You can make a game, but if every time someone says, why don't you do so-and-so, you decide to scream and curse at them, no one's going to really be interested in playing your game. Even social skills are becoming important. Because if you yell and rant on Twitter, that guy who said that I want to go kill Gabe Newell or I want to issue a death threat to him, that's not a very smart business practice right there. Oh, here's a game that's coming out tomorrow, Horse World. A game where I guess you manage horses. Okay then. Well, I'm sure we'll do a Let's Play on that in the near future. And again, that uniqueness, as Indy just said, is very important. But how do you value that as a company? How do you convince the consumer that uniqueness is important? I mean, heck, I'm running into that trouble here with growing the YouTube channel. I mean, we're doing unique interviews with game developers and discussing things that most gaming channels don't do. But how do you do that? Oh no, don't say that, El Gordo. I'm going to get flagged now. Or worse, that's going to now be what people are going to send me on YouTube or game developers. At least I didn't play that Super Seducer game. Well, let's see. What else is coming? Once you start looking at the Steam list, it's just amazing. Oh, God. Well, I was just saying there's now according to this, tomorrow there's going to be RoboCraft Royale, where I don't even know what this is, but I'm assuming it has Battle Royale in it. But again, everyone can make a Battle Royale game, but what is the consumer going to play? They're going to probably play PUBG and Fortnite. And I think just like with the MMO bust, it's going to lead to a lot of studios breaking. But here's, I think, another major point, what Indy said about uniqueness being important. Uniqueness is also expensive. Everyone can follow a blueprint. We've seen this with the AAA market. When Grand Theft Auto came out, everyone did open world games. When League of Legends and Team Fortress came out, everybody did those. And of course when PUBG comes out. But to actually build a game from scratch, your renowned explorers, Undertale, trying to think of some recent examples, even something like Nintendo games, it takes time to do that. Sort of Flipper Royale. I'm sure someone's actually working on that game right now. Considering there is that, I cannot believe it's a loot box game that came out. I'm sure someone's working on that. Let's see. But here's the big problem with the democratization of all these games. That I'm looking at this list right now, and it's very hard to spot the quality from just, the bargain binners. Like, I'll give you an example. Let's see. We have a game called The Land of Glass, which it looks like I'm not even sure what this game is. A collectible card game, a CCG meets ARPG with a stained glass aesthetic, which actually sounds really amazing. But then when I look below that, I see a game called Trivia Vault Auto Racing Trivia, a game called Social Justice War, and another one, How to Cope with Boredom and Loneliness. So as a consumer, when I see one or two games that don't look all that well, I'm going to assume all those other games don't look that great. And it's true that one bad apple does spoil the bunch. And why we've talked about before that Steam should do a better job of vetting these studios. So why there should be some kind of a gatekeeper. That would also help, Indy. People could make the actual games as good as the thumbnails. Let's see. What the heck? I just saw a game called PC Building Simulator. There's a game called Gamble. Gamble? Is that how you pronounce it? Which looks very basic. A platform where you play is literally an orange bubble. Yep. But again, when it comes to making this game, or comes to making these games, it takes a lot of time and effort to actually do this stuff. I mean, how many platformers have we seen indie developers make? But how many Super Meat Boys or a Slime Sand? There's very few of those because they did things uniquely. And I think another major part about this, and again, it seems like we're just going around in circles with this discussion. We'll move on to another topic in a second, is the fact that these games that go the distance, the bar has been raised. People don't care anymore, or they don't care as much if you have a unique game if it doesn't look well. The days of just, doing asset flipping but having a great core gameplay loop are gone. People expect quality whether they spend $50 or $5 on a game. And that throws a lot of challenges into trying to keep these games developed and keep them going. I mean, how does it feel to work on a game for 2 to 5 years and realize everyone just wants to play a $5 cheap game when you're trying to sell yours for $20? Yep. Again, you can't teach uniqueness. You can't just go to school and come out of it as an auteur. It's something you have to kind of either be born with or develop on your own, and then have your technical or hard skills compensate or be a major part of that. But I know we talked about this a lot last week, but let's see if there's anything else going on. Yep. And again, that effort takes time. Let's see, is there anything else happening so we can segue off? Let's see, EA talking on how to play Battlefield 1. Calls for better representation in games. The Paul Ritchie, the Star Control 2 lawsuit took another turn when they released the settlement proposal Stardock gave them. And it sounds like it's not going to get any better as time goes on. Let's see. Steam Spy says 2017 was Valve's most profitable year yet. The founder of Toys R Us sadly passed away. Trying to see if there's anything interesting. This is interesting. The Dead by Daylight developer, Behavior Interactive, is purchasing the publishing rights for their game from Starbreeze. So what that means is instead of Starbreeze having control over the publishing of the game and the royalties, and marketing it, they're going to buy it back, and essentially means they completely own, I think, the IP for it. So let's see. So they're going to pay out, someone's in my eye right now too, they're going to pay out a total of $16 million to reacquire the rights from Starbreeze. Let's see. So when Starbreeze invested in, they only spent around $2 million for it. So Starbreeze is certainly going to be getting a lot out of that. Now what that means going forward, though, as I just said, is that Behavior is going to own the rights to it. And somehow we're getting back to the other topic, that one of the major parts, again, is the brand IP for a lot of these games. Once you have that successful game, the brand value gives it its own additional bit of equity. Again, anyone can make a platformer or a Dead by Daylight clone or a PUBG clone, but there's only those specific titles. Yep. And that's the catch-22, indie. People want their games to become brands so they can just pump out more titles. But the only games that really become their own brands are the ones that take the time to develop it. Yep. Again, games like Oddworld being another good example. Those Oddworld games have become their own brand in of themselves, but they didn't just pump them out year after year. I know people would like them to do that, but Lorne Lanning and the rest of the studios working at their own pace. Yep, and that style is what is very hard to put into words. And it's also very hard to put into like a shareholders meeting too. How is Dead by Daylight doing too? That's great. There's Dead by Murder as well. Someone, I guess, trying to make another game. Or again, try to get off of someone else, leech off of someone else's brand. And we see that in the mobile space too, with people calling their games, Battle Royale, PUBG Simulator, or even using art assets to try and, confuse people that it's from the major studio. But, yeah, Dead by Daylight looks like it's still going strong. And here's another point. It's still going strong despite having a 70 on Metacritic. And looks like people are trying to review bomb it right now. Let's see. Like, it's had very positive reviews, and then they all kind of went down over the last few days. Yep. As Allure just said, Cuphead also had that. Someone literally tried to put Cuphead on mobile and steal it from the developers. Let's see what is going on here. And that's one of the other big things about these kinds of games. Yep. And again, we've said this before, but I think at some point, I think Valve will just have to bite the bullet and actually do some moderation. But talking about Valve, that is another topic in of itself. Speaking about games I've been playing, I've also been doing more Vermintide 2. I'm actually almost at the level cap. And I like the game, but I'm still running into the issue of what's going to keep people playing. And that's another very big point about keeping these games going. The whole idea of games as a service, I think, is also probably leading to some unintentional turnover as well. Where, how are you supposed to support a game for an additional 300 to 400 hours of content? Are the knockoffs advertising? I don't know about that, Indy. Because for a lot of the mobile or the knockoffs, they're just trying to confuse you, and there's no real direct link back to those games. It's not like this game inspired by so-and-so, click here to view that page. It's more or less like a sci-fi channel or one of those budget movies that are trying to play off the name, like Transformers, Transmorphers. There's been several Thor movies released at a very low quality. Yeah. Now, I have heard as a positive that Vermintide 2 has made more money in its first few weeks out than Vermintide 1 ever did. Yep, as Garrett said, it's more like bootlegging. So that is certainly good. And if you guys want to play it, we could probably do some live streams of it. I like to get Thorn back on, because when you're playing these games, it's definitely better to have a group of people talking rather than just one guy trying to comment on 4 things happening. Let's see. But Warhammer being another big example of branding. I mean, Warhammer has the tabletop. It has Warhammer Total War, which I've heard has been doing really well. But again, that's another case about branding kind of helping to sell the game. But there has to be something there to begin with. You can't just go out one day and say, I'm going to make a game that's going to be a 5-movie deal, and we're going to turn into a cartoon and have licensing. There has to be a game, there has to be a foundation there for it to work. We've talked about this before with Rovio and Angry Birds. Angry Birds didn't just magically appear one day to be a movie and all these spin-offs and a cartoon. They had to make a game that people wanted to play first. And I think kind of like the lesson for today is you can't just put a price on brand equity. You can't just magically make it appear one day. You have to build it up. Yet you can't make something from nothing. Again, once you have it, you then have to fight to keep it. We've said this before with Nintendo. They are very protective of their IPs, and for good reason. That's their bread and butter. You can have, again, we said this before, you can have 50 different platformers, but there's only one Mario. So if someone tries to make a Mario ripoff, Nintendo is going to come down with them with all the fury of the heavens. And it's also why they're very protective of, any kind of discussions of their games on YouTube. And it's one of those things that I get it, but I also understand why it pisses people off. They don't want someone making a video that people will think comes from Nintendo. They are just so religiously protective of that. Let's see. Yeah, and I just don't know how it's going to keep going forward. I think we're going to continue to see more independent games, that's for sure. But it's just very hard to get that foundation. And I said, just as Indy posted in chat, it's one of those things that it's kind of like you're putting the cart before the horse. You can't just fast forward 3 years where your game is like a bestseller, everybody wants to make spin-offs of your characters. It takes time to do that. And even games like Team Fortress and Payday 2 or Dead by Daylight, a lot of people associate their success, but not the work that goes into it. And I think the Payday that a developer, Lion Studios or something like that, who tried to make that World War II The Raid game, kind of failed to understand that you can copy game design at a technical layer or a technical level. You can say, I'm going to build a platformer where my character jumps just as high as Mario does and picks up fireballs, fire flowers. But getting the understanding of what makes these games work is a different story. We've used that example before of people who copy someone else's homework, and yes, they turn in something that sounds right, but it doesn't understand why that is. And the Souls-like being a really great example. When I played Dark Souls 2 on the stream, Dark Souls 2 is definitely the worst from a mechanics standpoint of the Souls-like. But at the same time, though, it still has that DNA that works. And it's a genre where you have to really grasp the intricacies of it, or the game just doesn't work out well. It's the difference between, playing something like The Surge versus playing Bloodborne. Now, I'm trying to do 3 things here at once by reading chat, talking, and also seeing what people are saying about Vermintide 2. Don't we be amazing? Work to be amazing, yeah? I mean, I'm kind of seeing that now with more people wanting to talk to me on the podcast, getting developer keys. It takes time to get to that point, but a lot of people don't want to do that. They just want to copy what's hot and then just be happy with getting a quarter of that success. The same thing with the MMO market. But at the end of the day, though, if you're not memorable, short-term success is fleeting. You can make a game that does well or does moderately well, but then are those people going to stick around for your second or your third game? Oh, let's talk about what makes a Metroidvania. That should add another hour to this discussion. And that's the section I'm actually stuck on right now when I'm writing in the book about Super Metroid, Super Metroid, and what made it work as a Metroidvania, despite the fact that the Metroidvania inspirations were Zelda and Castlevania, and most people talk about Castlevania Symphony of the Night. Speaking of, I know Hollow Knight is gearing up to release their final bit of free DLC. So that's going to be very exciting, and maybe we'll do another run of that. Let's see, is there a date? They announced it in January. I know they just did a beta for it, or it's free to the public, or early tests. Let's see. Nothing there yet. But speaking about that equity, Shovel Knight being another big example of that. I'm sure Yacht Club Games had no idea how big that was going to blow up. But now they're doing, cross-supporting on Nintendo. I will probably have to buy those, the other Knight amiibos that they're releasing. And they're continuing to support that game. But that also raises another big point. And we've talked about this before. If you have a successful game brand, do you continue that with a brand new sequel, or do you try to make another game? Because we've said that for a lot of independent studios, it's more about trying to make the studio the brand rather than the game. Because once your studio becomes famous, it kind of becomes almost like you're printing money. Again, we've said this before, but Studio MDHR, whatever their next game is, even if it has nothing related to Cuphead, it will still get a lot of recognition simply when people see that logo. And it says, from the developers of Cuphead when they're advertising. The same goes for Red Hook Games. I know Chris was joking about it, but if they do decide to make, Brightest Kittens as their next game or the follow-up to Darkest Dungeon, it will still get a lot of press and buzz. Because people now know the name Red Hook, just as they know the name Nintendo. Or, trying to think of some other quick examples, which is also a really good point there. But I'm also speaking about that kind of brand equity, I'm kind of curious to see how God of War, the new one, is going to do. A lot of people say it's going to be a different formula to compare to previous ones, especially since David Jaffe, the creator, is no longer a part. And while people are certainly hype about it, again, it feels weird, right, to be excited about a game that the creator is no longer a part of. The same goes for like SimCity 2014, or trying to think of some other big examples off the top of my head. God of War: The Last of Us. Yep, and that's true as well, Indy, as we saw with No Man's Sky. But it is one of those very weird things. And let me check our time here, because we have to be at least, I was just about to say, we have to be about 50 minutes in. That people want personalities. For those of you who don't remember, there's that infamous PC Gamer feature, the new gods of game development, where they looked at people like American McGee, Cliff Bleszinski. I always forget the woman. Man, I apologize too. But they were trying to build these developers up as, they're going to replace Will Wright and Warren Spector and Sid Meier as the next big team. But then it never really happened, not in that same sense. And it's weird. The game industry, on one hand, is very protective of the old guard. Again, Shigeru Miyamoto, Hideo Kojima, Will Wright, Sid Meier. But in the same breath, they're all too happy to quickly throw those names out when someone else makes a game. But in those cases, it's more about the studio and the IP. I've said this before. Everybody knows Call of Duty. They know who the Assassin's Creed is. But how many people know who the creative director is on that? Yep. That's the other point, and indeed I was getting at when talking about my presentation. How do you describe to someone what does it mean to make games? It just, like, game designer is such an awful term, like craftsman or artist. If you say I'm a woodworker, or a blacksmith, or an ironworker, that's easy to understand. If you say I'm a knitter, or I do crocheting, or I draw, or I paint, that's at least a little bit easier, but game design is such a blanket term. And we've said this before, just because you know one genre doesn't mean you can make every genre known to man. Although now I would love to see Hideo Kojima's take on I don't know, on idle games. A Hideo Kojima idle game. That should work. I'm the new god of gaming. But again, it's just very awkward how the game industry and how consumers kind of put certain things on a pedestal. And it's both good and bad. It creates that equity, but it makes it hard for everyone else to survive. Do you believe there is unlimited math? I don't know. I'm not quite sure I get the question, I'm afraid, Indy. Do you mean like infinite potential or infinite games to make? But getting back to the idea of propping up developers, it's a very weird thing. Oh, that there's unlimited coding potential. I don't know. I do think like when it comes to the hardware or the tech side, there is going to be that limit. You know, the idea of the chase for photorealism. But design in of itself is also an art. And when it comes to art, that's certainly unlimited. You know, as long as you're able to have an original thought in your head, you can create something. But the point I was about to say is there are developers out there who they just see this as work. They don't care about, you know, giving interviews at IGN or having people want to talk to them for 50 hours like it's, you know, the most amazing thing. They just want, this is their job. And they don't care about that. But then there are developers who have been propped up, who have gotten that massive ego boost, and now they've become part of their own brand, like Cliffy B or Cliff Bleszinski. Even Sid Meier is an example of that. There's a reason why it's called Sid Meier Civilization and not just Civilization. Do you think game design is similar to other forms? Again, it's so hard to say. Because game design is really made up of a lot of soft skills compared to other industries. And it is something that you really can't put a price on, despite how much game developers would like to do it. And it goes back to the point of unionizing. I am certainly for a game designers union to give these people more protection and give them more security when it comes to work. Because at the end of the day, the games that do sell the best are the ones created by unique and inventive people. And if you drive them out, what games are you going to have in the AAA space? But again, there's that risk that you have to describe to people. It's very hard to tell a company, give me $3 to $5 million and I'll make a game that may or may not sell 5 million copies. And it's why it's become such a luxury to go to the independent space where you can kind of downplay and mitigate a lot of those risks by saying, I'm just going to make this game and it's going to be a year long, or it's going to be 1 to 2 years long. There isn't a tree. Yep, exactly. Should you design for yourself or should you design for your audience? That's that big question. You kind of have to do it a little bit both ways. The idea has to come from you. You can't just design a game by committee, or that at least is something that's very soulless. But at the end of the day, though, there has to be people wanting to play your game, or you're just simply a hobbyist. You're just making games for you and your 5 friends. But sometimes you just don't know if that idea of yours is going to be a sell 100 copies or 100,000 copies. And sometimes if the game is good enough, it can succeed on its own, but you have to understand there's so much you can do to mitigate and remove that uncertainty. Doing PR, having good social media practices, getting advice from people and iterating and playtesting. And again, I think, let me check our time. I think we'll wrap things up in a few minutes, but the point is, you can't just design these games in a vacuum. There's no scientific process, or there's no scientific method that makes great games. Are there secret games out there? I don't know. We can certainly talk about fan-made games, but I guess the question is, do game developers want to seek out niches like that? As in, is the goal of a game developer to make a game that only 50 people like? No, I think everybody wants to have that success. But again, success is measured differently by everybody. What's the most important? And that I think it could be a battle royale. And then previously to that was loot boxes, and then before that was Dark Souls. I think one of the most important things that happened over the last decade was standardization in terms of control design or control schemes and making games easier to understand. But again, that's another big point. That kind of stuff is boring. Like, what's more exciting to someone? Making sure that your control scheme is universal across platforms? Or having, high def characters and emotional stories like The Last of Us or Grand Theft Auto? What non-game art influences you the most? I don't know. I don't think I'm the right person to answer that, but we did have that podcast about taking outside influences on games, be it movies, TV shows, or even just looking at other industries or other markets and seeing if you can make a game around that. But it takes a lot to go out and do something on your own. I mean, for instance, I've been watching all those shows about gold mining lately. That's an industry that you're not just going to take $10 and be able to do something. It has a very high barrier. And you kind of have to want to do it. And the game industry used to be that way. The barrier has been lowered. But as we've said, there's a very big difference between someone making games just to copy someone and someone making games to make something completely unique and that's going to have very interesting discussions out of it. But I think with that said, my voice is starting to go on me, so I think we'll wrap things up for this week. Again, for those of you who are new and would like to join the Discord channel, be sure to check it in the description below. There's an Art of War. Probably. I'm sure it could have been written by EA or Activision. But talking more about the business side, I think we'll say that for another time, as I need to get back to writing and preparing things. But be sure to come back later tonight for the Alice Madness Returns Let's Play, and for the Dissecting Design piece tomorrow. And if you'd like to get an ad-free version of this video up early, be sure to check out patreon.com/gwblazer for VIP access. But that's going to do it for this week. Hopefully Rob will be back next week, and I'll have someone to talk to, other than just me talking to you folks and the ether out there. So, have a great rest of the Sunday afternoon. I will see you all later, and we'll see how the stream goes. But until then, have a great day.